Okay, welcome back everybody to Diverse Educators Virtual Conference 5. We have our panel 2 waiting in the wings to talk to you about diverse curriculum. So just by way of introductions, we have Andrea with us today, who is the co-head teacher of School 360. We also have Kirsty, who is a primary head teacher, Laura, who is a teacher and a member of the Disability Ed Development Group. We have Harriet, the head of educational research at Lifter, one of our partner organisations. And finally, we've got Jordan, who is a primary teacher and a history lead and a founding member of the GEC, another one of our partner organisations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrea to talk us through your topic. Andrea, over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Hannah, Benny. Thank you, Diverse Educators, for having us. I'm Andrea Silvain, and I'm the co-head teacher of Big Education's new primary school, School 360, which opens its doors to a brand new reception cohort this September. Before that, I was working at School 21. I was a leader there, which is a part of the same trust, and that's a school in Newham, East London, a 4 to 18 school. And the school's mission is to empower young people to take on the world, which is a bold and ambitious statement, and one that I align with fully and am completely excited about. And, you know, as part of the trust, we do that through a range of different ways. We focus on an education of the head, heart and hand, an all-round education. We teach oracy explicitly, and we have project-based learning, real-world learning, a coaching curriculum. This is just to name a few. However, interestingly, yesterday, I received a beautiful children's book that I'd ordered a while ago, and it's by the author Dapo Adeola, and it's called Hey You. I'm not sure if you haven't seen it, you should definitely order it. And it's described as an empowering celebration of growing up Black. And as I was reading the foreword, I was really struck by a question that the author said he was asked by his editor. And the question was, when was the first time you felt empowered as a Black person, that you deeply believed that you could live your dreams? So I'm just going to repeat the question. When was the first time that you felt empowered as a Black person, that you deeply believed that you could fulfill your dreams? And he said that the answer to him was in his mid to late 20s. And when I reflected on that myself, I realized that it was probably about the same age for me, if not later than that. And he also said that he asked himself, what might have been different if I felt more confident and assured in my skin at a younger age if my story had been told? What might have been? Okay, so last summer at School 21, it was recognised more glaringly than ever before that it's not possible for the school to fulfil its mission to empower young people to take on the world without being actively anti-racist. It's not possible at all. And this was a massive call to action last year. So this galvanised the team. This included policy review, really truly listening to the students in a way without judgment, where they felt safe. That was working itself to create that space, listening to staff and creating an environment where people could be honest about their experiences. And of course, we had to completely look at the curriculum. So a lot of dedicated time was given to staff to look at the short, medium and long-term development of an anti-racist curriculum. Some of the concepts that were specifically named were looking at tokenism and how to avoid that, othering, and the single story narrative, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. So my colleague Louise Holyoke, she is part of the Anti-Racism Working Party at School 21 that's strategizing around this work. And we really want this work to filter out into the trust, and particularly at School 360. She's written an excellent blog about this with explanations and examples in practice, and it's published on the Big Education website. It's certainly worth reading, and it's had powerful impact, so please do check it out. But at School 360, we have such a unique opportunity to create something brand new. So we're not trying to change habits that have already been formed or adapt what's already there. We've got the opportunity to build something brand new from scratch. And as one of the family of schools of the Big Education Trust, we're focused on oracy. And we want to place a particular emphasis on storytelling in our primary school. And I know that some of the speakers have spoken a little bit about that earlier on today, and it's so exciting to hear what everybody's doing. Because when I watched the TED Talk by the author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which some of you might have seen, about the single story narrative. I couldn't believe how much it resonated with the school's philosophy, School 360's philosophy around storytelling. She speaks about stories as being the connection between humans as equals, which is at the heart of the community. She sees the dominant story being told as a manifestation of power and articulates the danger of only hearing one story. Well, I don't have very much time, so I'm just going to try and wrap up and say that we want our curriculum at School 360 to ensure that children's homes and cultures from the beginning are integrated into school culture, for them to develop empathy, to feel truly empowered to take on the world. We're going to have a purpose-built room dedicated to creating genuine links with all members of the community, so hearing multiple perspectives. Follow our journey. We're very excited about it. I'm just going to end by saying it's relatively simple to download a policy and get a list of actions, but that's not how this is done. I'm here to say that creating an anti-racist school, it starts with the people in it. It starts from recruitment. It starts with you. And it's not easy work. And we have to ask ourselves, how much of it are we doing? What are we reading? What conversations are we having? What are we challenging? Who are we challenging? What data are we interrogating? And what are we interrogating within ourselves? Have we accepted this as lifelong work? And are we truly empowering young people to take on the world, not later, not in their late 20s or beyond, but right now? So thank you for listening. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really, really powerful. It's great to hear the work that you've been doing. I'm going to move straight on to Kirsty. Kirsty, over to you.
Okay, good morning. And that was inspirational, Andy. I am definitely going to follow your journey. I'm going to talk more specifically about LGBTQ. I'm a head teacher of a primary school in Dewsbury. I'm part of Focus Academy Trust. At the moment, our community is around 87% Muslim, which brings about its own challenges. 5 minutes isn't a long time, so I'm going to focus on some key advice, really. But just a bit of background. When I was at school, there was a ban on promoting homosexuality. There was a lot of fear regarding AIDS that was all directed towards that community. We jumped forward 30 plus, unfortunately, years. And the government have only just made it compulsory to start teaching about different families in education. I still get messages every single week from members of staff from other schools who find themselves in challenging situations. They either feel that they are being bullied or not supported. So we're not there. We're definitely not there. So we have to do something. And I think we are in a fantastic place to be able to do that as educators. We can reduce discrimination by education. I had a bit of a life-changing moment when I went to a conference and I spoke to somebody that made me realise that I had ignored, not on purpose, but you don't know what you don't know. I'd ignored a group in society in the way I was educating my pupils within school. So I made a pact, if you like, a personal pact to change that. So this is a little bit of my advice, really. Firstly, if you really want an inclusive school and an inclusive curriculum, it is not about Diversity Week. That touches the surface. It's got to be embedded across everything you do. I'm talking about maths. I'm talking about the books you used when you're teaching English. I'm talking about the pictures children see on a day-to-day basis, the resources in early years that you're using, everything. The second thing I want to say is you have to support your staff. So there's a lot of discomfort or worry about teaching children regarding aspects of LGBTQ. Most of it genuinely is not because staff don't want to teach it. They are scared of getting it wrong. For most people in my school, it was not their lived experience. So I had to think about how could I make them comfortable in teaching children. And part of the way I did that was get somebody to come and speak to them. I made them empathise, and actually that was the best thing that I ever did. They got it. They realised that this was impacting on people's lives, on their mental health, and overnight, like I say, they switched. I made sure that we had the resources and the training, so they didn't feel scared about getting it wrong, getting the vocabulary wrong. So So that was the second point. The third thing, I want to talk about strategy. So, I mean, Andy mentioned about policies. It's not enough just to dabble. I don't know if that's the right word. It's got to run across everything that you do. You know, I want people, prospective staff, prospective pupils, to look at my website, for example, and know categorically they'll be celebrated, not just, you know, not tolerated. And I think people get that from the website. They get it when they walk in the building. They get it when they read my policies. You know, it's got to run across everything you do. It's in my improvement plan. You know, you can read about the work we do on our SEF. It's not tokenistic. The fourth point, I've got to wrap up, I think, in a minute. Parent engagement. So I got this wrong. I will, you know, put my hand up and say, I assumed, because not many people turned up to my workshop and this is what we're going to be doing, that everything was okay. And it was for a couple of years until everything started again in Birmingham, and then it became an issue. And I realised I had assumed that everything was okay. What I should have done was encourage more parents to engage with me, rather than thinking, oh, I got away with that. I got away with not having difficult conversations. And then, so what I did from that was pre-plan my answers to the questions I knew were going to come up. And my last point really is just be resolute. We cannot, as educators, pick and choose which of the 9 protected characteristics we feel comfortable teaching. That is not okay. It is our moral duty to teach all of them, regardless of how difficult that might be. That is our job. And I think that's it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. So powerful. And yes, those tensions between protected characteristics can feel like tricky areas to navigate, but you're right, we cannot decide which ones are more important. So we're going to move on to Laura, who's going to talk to us about neurodiversity. Laura, over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me today, and Andy and Kirsty, I really echo everything that they said, and also the first panel today. It's been a really inspirational day, and so much to take away and think about. My name is Laura McConnell. I'm a teacher for part of the week. I also work for the NHS in training to do with autism and ADHD, and I am a board member, we call it the reference group of the National Autistic Society Scotland, and part of a group called Call It Out, which works with the persecuted Irish minority in Scotland, and also I founded a group called the Edinburgh ACEs Hub, which looks at trauma-informed practice and works in the mental health sector. We are all neurodiverse, and every single person sitting on this panel and every single person watching this video is neurodiverse. And some of you might wonder what I mean by that, because the word neurodiverse or neurodiversity seems to have become synonymous with autistic or dyslexic or ADHD or dyspraxic within education, and that's a mistake. Neurodiversity first came around as a term in 1998 by the autistic social scientist Judy Singer, who said in a chapter that she contributed to a book that even our most taken for granted assumptions that we all more or less see, feel, touch, hear, smell and sort information in more or less the same way are being dissolved. The human species thinks and acts in different ways, and that is okay. But there are some ways that we think and that we act that are typically accepted in society. Whether actually the majority of us think and act in that way is a different story, but there are some ways of thinking and acting and being that are typically accepted, and in our community we would define that as being neurotypical. And then there are some people who do not think and act and live in those typical ways, and in our community we would call those, we reference that as neurodivergent. Neurodiversity is the paradigm, it is the social pattern that covers everyone. And quite frankly, I'm really tired of the word inclusion. I know that might be controversial on a diversity event, but inclusion, I'm finished with it. I want to have I want our education system to be accessible. Inclusion implies to me that there is a normal, that there is a typical system, that there is mainstream. And we're really, really invested in mainstream in education. And every time I talk about accessibility and every time I talk about inclusion, people say, but what about? But what about this? But in my school, we can't do that because this is the way that we do it. That doesn't work in mainstream. People say to me, are you even a teacher? Have you ever taught in mainstream? Have you taught in secondary? Have you taught in a deprived area? But, what about, no matter, anytime you try to bring about any change in any sort of diverse topic, there's always a big but standing in the way of it, and that it's time for it to go. Inclusion means that there is a typical, and I, as a disabled person, as a person that intersects other minority characteristics, I am being included. They have to make a difference to get me to the table. They have to fit me in. They're doing me a favour. They are making some reasonable adjustments, although quite often they'll say, I don't think that is reasonable. I'm not going to make those adjustments. I am an outsider and I am being allowed into their group. But is that working for any of us? I don't think it's working for anybody who's going to be involved in this event today. If you're coming along to a diversity event, I think that you're already buying into the fact that the norm isn't working. What we need to think about in education is accessibility. And for me, that is fitting in every way of thinking and acting. But that includes, I suppose, all of the other characteristics as well. We can do that in really practical ways. But we can also just do that by being very accepting of others, and that by accepting that the typical, the norm, the mainstream, but what about, the big buts need to go. So the best practical solution that I can think of is that when you are faced with a child or a staff member that you need to make a reasonable adjustment for, don't use the word but. Think, how can I just listen to them and take that word out of your vocabulary. Thank you so much for having me today, and hopefully I've not offended anyone by hating inclusion.
Not at all. I think it's always important to put these ideas out there. So we very much appreciate your perspective, Laura. Thank you for that. All right, we're going to move over to Harriet, who will talk to us about her work with Lifter.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Harriet. I wear a couple of hats, but the one I'm here for today is as Head of Educational Research at Lifter. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions that keep coming up in my head. And Laura, I love this reframing the concept of inclusion to talk more about accessibility. And I think I'm going to try and weave that in there somewhere because I really agree with it. How can we better connect with others, particularly those that may come from different backgrounds to ourselves or come from other countries, and also better connect with the wider world, especially when we feel disconnected or isolated. And I think the COVID-19 situation has brought that about in lots of different ways for us and made us rethink things in lots of lovely ways. And how do we better bridge that knowledge action gap? Because there's been lots of calls for action and being active, being change makers to make this world a more sustainable or indeed a more socially just place, which is what we're very much talking about here. But what my concern is, as it has been for 20 plus years in my field of global learning and development education, where things like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Dangers of the Single Story TED Talk is like essential groundwork watching before you even go into this field. What my concern is always that we talk about moving to action, or someone comes up with a remedy to an issue within the world or within society, and it's get the knowledge in schools and then they'll act. And there's a fundamental gap between those two things, and it's called building connection, building empathy, and building a sense of belonging, and creating safe and open spaces so that you can bring those more complex and really difficult issues into a learning environment. So things like big abstract or overwhelming issues that you get in sustainable development, from poverty to health and well-being, to climate change, to biodiversity loss, huge things. We sort of think throw them in the curriculum, and then we'll all get a better world. And so let's take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, for example, which are United Nations framework, if you like, for a better world that came about in 2005. We have a 2030 target to reach, 169 different targets within that. I fit very much, and Lifter will move to now, fits within 4.7, which is all about building educational systems and curricula and everything you like, both for younger people and older people. It's a lifelong learning project. Education does not stop at 18 and all of that, to better engage and understand education for sustainable development. But part of that links to better understanding human diversity and difference around the world. So let's take these really difficult things, and one way we've been talking about how we meet that demand, and that demand's also coming from young people too. So in my role, I've had the wonderful privilege of talking to lots of young people recently, a group of wonderful year 11 students, for example, in Kent, who were talking about the need for more diversity within their school, and it came from them because they looked around, they recognized there wasn't much, but they also said they wanted more multiple perspectives, and they did want better skills to deal with the fact that there are stereotypes coming around, and they wanted to feel like they had better skills to do that. So we do this in lots of ways. So Lifter is a digital immersive platform where you have these 360-degree experiences of different stories from all around the world. Some of you were here may have heard Kahir talk earlier, and there are so many different stories and so many different perspectives, and it's growing all the time. There's lesson plans to associate that link with all the different story worlds. And I think one of the ways we need to start thinking is reframing empathy and reframing belonging, and thinking a little bit more creatively about what belonging means. It's not just to other human beings. To create sense of feeling like you're connected, some people also get a sense of connection with nature or with animals or with other roles. And we have stories that sort of reflect lots of different dimensions, if you like, of belonging, and they're stories of resilience as well. And from the connection with people comes in lots of different ways. That's the obvious one. Okay, I will wrap up soon. Thank you. And we've got a new story world out on Kids Cup, which is fantastic, and young people's perspectives from really diverse, very diverse different parts of the world. But they're all working towards going to Norway to compete in the Kids Cup, and it's a wonderful, diverse human story narrative. So I also think there's lots of thought in sustainable well-being as a concept, which brings together sustainability and human well-being, because I think they are profoundly interconnected. And I think my parting message then is that we mustn't just assume that when we get the facts in there, or these really sometimes quite scary statistics or worries, or that'll necessarily lead to action. That we do need to listen to younger people too, that might mean shifting a system or shifting something else to bridge that knowledge action gap within this wider field. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Harriet. Some really interesting food for thought there. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that as we go. So I'm going to move over to Jordan, who's going to be talking to us about the global equality research in the classroom. And he is representing the GEC today, one of our partner organisations. Over to you, Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you to all the other speakers as well. It's fantastic. I'm a year 2 teacher. I've taught every year from 2 to 6, but I'm a year 2 teacher currently in a 3-form elementary school in Kent. We were inspired about 4 years ago by watching Graham Andre's No More Boys and Girls documentary. in which the BBC went into a school and challenged children's ideas about what it meant to be a boy, to be a girl, to be a man, to be a woman, and the aspirations that they could hold. We thought we wanted to do something similar in our school, and we were lucky enough to send a group of our teachers over to the Isle of Wight to meet Graham, to meet all sorts of all the teachers that were there, to observe the lessons and see what they had done. We then led a pilot of one class in each year group in delivering explicit gender equality lessons each week, about 20 to 30 minutes as part of our PSHE provision. We found that we were basically making it up as we went along. There was nothing out there to help us deliver these lessons in gender equality. There was bits and pieces here and there that we managed to find on various websites, but there was nothing cohesive. We created a document of milestones that we wanted children to achieve in each phase, and they followed different patterns of gender awareness or stereotype awareness, of the language that we wanted them to be able to use at different ages, the emotional literacy as well that we wanted children to be able to access, and also the aspirations and what we wanted children to be able to demonstrate in terms of their own hopes and aspirations for life. We found that there was a problem with our initial assessment. We kind of copied an assessment that Graham and the team had used in the documentary, but we found that our children were telling us what they thought we wanted them to say, not what their attitudes actually demonstrated. And so we felt that we needed to call someone in to help us. And that's where Lauren Spinner, who was at the University of Kent at Canterbury, came in. We invited her into school to really help us to assess children's genuine attitudes rather than their knowledge, which is what we do naturally as teachers. And she introduced us to the implicit association test, and she then thought, well, this is amazing, we could do a whole study on this. The study that we then started the next year followed about 100 children within school in classes that hadn't been in the school in the pilot, and then those classes then delivered again about 30 minutes each week of dedicated gender equality lessons. We followed a scheme of work that someone called Chris Lawson, who's also a GEC member, made available to us, and that then gave us an outline, a bit of a structure of themes that we could then make available to teachers. We had themes for each term, things like toys and games, things like equality in sport, marketing, jobs. We had a whole term on emotional literacy, which is so important. The studies show that girls are better at boys at showing almost every emotion other than anger. When we did an initial assessment with talking to the children, they even listed angry as something boys should be. And so by using the Junto Institute emotion wheel, we were then able to pick one key emotion each week that we were then able to look at and really pick apart and look at the language around that. Most of the lessons comprised of a stimulus, could be a picture, an advert, a piece of film, something that then we then opened up into a discussion around the class, and then maybe did an activity around that afterwards. We quite often came back to earlier things, and when we came back to them, redressed their attitudes. We encouraged teachers to look at the books they were using, the curriculum they were using that's been mentioned earlier, to help children feel represented. The study was published last month in the Journal of School Psychology. The key findings were children's understanding of fairness massively increased. Children reported themselves as more similar to the opposite sex, and also there was less conflict between gender and political career or potential careers. So the girls saw themselves as more able go into STEM subjects and boys saw themselves as more able to go into caring professions. The control school that was down the road that was doing the same assessments found no change or even a deterioration in these attitudes over the same time. And it seems that we're the only study of this kind to look at precisely this. So we've shown that it can work. I joined the GEC as a founder member about 3 years ago. Lauren has also joined since, the psychologist that ran the study. And we really joined because they were putting together the sort of support that we were having to make up for ourselves. And we really looked at the gender stereotypes simply because they're the most salient to young children. And then once they're able to get those skills of identifying the stereotypes, they're then able to identify stereotypes around race, around religion, around disability, around whatever else. So that intersectional approach really helps. I realise I'm running out of time now, so I'll leave it there. But thank you so much.
Really interesting listening to you. I know we had a few audio issues. I know, Jordan, your Wi-Fi connection hasn't been awesome, but we got most of what you were saying.
Sorry.
So thank you. That's all right. So you don't need to apologise. We did hear what you were saying, but there'll be time to come back to things in the questions. And speaking of questions, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who has been monitoring the comments. Hannah, over to you for questions.
Thank you all five. So honestly, I've got about 4 pages of notes here just for myself to process. Kirsty, let me come to you first, because I know you saw a question or a comment in the chat that you just wanted to clarify when you were talking about your school context and being an ally for LGBTQI, but the tension with the faith community. Do you want to just clarify?
Yeah, just I made a comment that having such a high percentage of Muslim pupils was problematic, and I purely meant regarding the tensions between the teaching we were trying to do and the religious beliefs. I just wanted to put that into context, really. Problematic in no other way. It's an absolute joy, actually. And what's been amazing has been the discussions. I've really changed my viewpoint and perhaps how I address certain things by having really clear communication and really deep conversations with members of the community, and that's been really helpful for me. So I just wanted to clear that up. I wasn't saying my community was problematic.
No, thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, Kirsty, with a question, but it comes up a lot. I think of the protected characteristics, the tension between those two in particular, and Dr. Anna Carlisle, who's one of our friends at Diverse Ed, she did her PhD looking at this. So if you look at her work at Goldsmiths, but I was talking to Jack earlier on about a school he's supporting where it's Catholic faith systems and LGBTQI. So there's lots of tensions in all of the different faiths and religions. Let me come back to you, Kirsty, about specific sort of like examples around the curriculum. You yourself mentioned doing DEI work in maths. I think going back to Laura's word, but I think for my listening, the maths department quite often are, but how do we do this in maths? Have you got any examples or practical kind of like suggestions about how your team has gone about doing DEI in maths?
Yeah, so I think it's all about what children see and what they're presented with. So just a simple example would be when you have word problems, you generally have mum and dad are trying to divide out the pizza between their children, how many pieces were left over. Well, why can't you have mum and mum doing that? It's exactly the same maths. So that's a very simple example. But even things like the clip art that you show, we make sure that we show a range of different families, different ethnicities, and people think, oh yeah, that's a bit tokenistic. It's not. If children are seeing themselves in everything you do and everywhere, it just becomes normality, which is what it is.
Thank you, Kirsty. That's a great practical example there, because it is the butter of the subject portfolio quite often. Andy, let me come to you. Like you talked about interrogation. And interrogation, you need a kind of a culture of safety. How have you set up the conditions in your school to be able to do that interrogation where it doesn't feel personal and people don't get on the defensive?
It's a good question, and it's not easy, and it's not a quick thing either. You have to be really clear around the protocols of the discussion, and it's modelled actually in what we do with students. So when I was at School 21, we have a coaching curriculum, and when we enter those lessons, a space that feels different. It's something that the teachers step out of, and the students can have a discussion about a topic without facing the same kind of interruption, challenge that they might do in other subjects. And you notice that when you first get those students, it's they're hesitant and they're a bit nervous. They know what they're supposed to say, and they want to say that instead of what they really believe they should say. But with the experience of there being no repercussion in a negative way of being open, and of it having impact, you find that it becomes easier. And for us, it's the same with the staff. It's not going to happen immediately. You can't expect, next week we're going to have a meeting and we want everyone to be really open. It has to be in your whole culture. What are you doing to build up to create that sense of safety? Are people being shut down or made to feel bad for what they've said? And yes, it's just not to be done overnight, really.
Thank you, Andy. And coming back to you, Jordan, so Andy's talked there about how you create that psychological safety for the adults. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how you work with Lauren for her to create the conditions for the young people to truly be honest?
That's an interesting one. Lauren basically came in really to appraise what we were already doing, and we really started from a starting point of listening to the children and listening to what their attitudes already were, talking to them about how there are differences between boys and girls. What do we think those differences are? There was a real focus within those lessons on listening to other people, not necessarily challenging their views, but then learning to challenge them in a more appropriate way, in a more polite way, and really listening to each other's ideas. There was a lot of really sort of light bulb moments where the boys especially were then listening to the girls and how the girls felt at being represented in things like football, or being represented in books, or being represented in adverts, and things that they had never thought about. And so really by kind of approaching it in a very gentle way early on within the class, it kind of created that environment whereby children were able to listen to each other. One thing that really struck me was the pride that children took in learning about gender equality. At one point, my year 3 class at the time, when I explained, well, not every school does this, not every class does this, I had a girl go, but why not? It's so important. And so having that pride really then meant the children were wanting to listen to each other and wanting to look at their attitudes. It's not a quick thing to do. You have to build that environment gently within your class, but when you get it there, it's so worth it.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you. And Harriet, if I can come to you about creating human connections and listening. Cahill talked about the intergenerational piece. And I know you didn't mention this, but I know this is what your research is in. And if you think about the protected characteristics and age and ageism in particular, would you like to just share any thoughts from your research about how we use the intergenerational connections within our DEI work in our schools?
Well, that's sort of a separate hat to some of the things, although I do think LIFTA as a platform does some fantastic things for facilitating intergenerational connection, because there's a whole range of ages there as well now, and increased number of younger people, like our 3 girls, 1 boy footballers, to wonderful older strudel making sisters in Hungary, and I think that's going to be a resource like many others that can better help us understand how to create really necessary intergenerational spaces. What links to some of my research or my reference to UNESCO work on lifelong learning, for example, is to help us start reframing and rethinking spaces of education and learning. Going back to something I mentioned at the end, I think I know we, in our bubble, we know this. We know education doesn't stop at 18. Formal education is not the only space, but sometimes it feels like society society only ever references that as our learning spaces, and very crucial learning spaces take place outside of formal schooling. We've really learned that in COVID, and that needs to be better understood. And just because someone is older does not necessarily mean they are wiser or more knowledgeable and actually really fruitful. And there's lots of research linked to this. I can send some links if you like that we could post somewhere that shows creating these safe spaces for intergenerational, genuinely reciprocal intergenerational learning that links to a project or maybe a societal action campaign or a global project on plastic pollution, for example. I know a couple of those. Is a wonderful way of thinking about different learning relationships and different patterns and different spaces of learning that are increasingly crucial in our constantly shifting world, where jobs, we don't even know what jobs these young people are going for. I know that's a cliche as well, but it's a really important point, because that career trajectory, that production mode of educating towards a test that will then be used in exchange for academic credit for a job, that's going. And we have to shift and change our way of our skills and our values and well, hopefully not so much our values, but our competences very swiftly, very quickly, as we respond to different changing environments, as this last situation has happened, as the climate change situation is happening. Unfortunately, people don't see so much of the urgency there, because we're not having to see the increasing sea levels or the fact that it's going to be 3 degrees hotter and all of those things. But if we can possibly empathise and link more with people around the world who are experiencing those things, maybe we can better understand the urgency of some of these changes that are required. And so I do think intergenerational learning and understanding how different generations, the norms, values and historical and political contexts in which they've framed their world, the more we can understand that, the better. And so I think there's lots of resources there. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harriet. And Laura, you talk so passionately and with such conviction. Like I hear an activist, and activism is not a word that everyone necessarily uses about themselves. And Andy talks about how we create these young change makers, how we get that agency in our young people. Can you just share some of the things that have helped you get to the point where you are an activist for disability awareness and advocacy?
I suppose through bad experiences and through negativity and through trauma, and realising that if I were to drop dead tomorrow morning, then I will be replaced in my role as a teacher in the school, and that's something that, you know, if I were to keep quiet about some of the reasons that may happen. I unfortunately once tried to commit suicide due to reasons around disability discrimination that came at a school level, and I've just decided to that I don't want that to happen to anyone else. And what I have found, and I think this will touch, I suppose, on every single protected characteristic, and other people will probably understand this. Children are really curious. Children want to know things. Children are lovely, and children are kind. And when I wear my sunflower lanyard in school, and when children ask me what that is, I'll say it's because I am autistic. And children have heard the word autistic, and they want to know what that means. So I will speak to them about it, and I'll speak to them factually about it, and they will ask me questions, and those questions are not rude, and those questions are not unkind, but in I suppose with disability it's seen as quite shameful a lot of the time, and people don't want to talk about it, and people who maybe are unsure about what to say, and I suppose that could be about race and LGBT issues. People don't want to get things wrong, and when you open up a forum to children where you can speak openly and they recognise themselves in you, then it gives them that power to think, well, my teacher is autistic and I'm autistic, and I don't have to keep that a secret anymore. I can talk about that, and that's okay. And I think that's something that we should all, I suppose, aspire to do if we are able to, and if we feel safe to, because we don't all feel safe in our school environments to talk about issues surrounding our own personal experience, and we also have to protect that in ourselves. But where you do feel safe, that it's a really positive experience for children, and it's something that, you know, as Kirsty said earlier on, getting people in with lived experience. If you don't have it in your school, ask people. People love to talk about themselves. They'll come in and they'll do it.
Laura, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing part of your personal story there. And what I'm hearing is it's the power of having your voice and using that voice for yourself, but also for others. I'm going to ask for a very quick fire round of a one sentence from each of you for my diverse pledge is. So Andy, what would you like to share as your pledge?
So my pledge is to seek out stories from a range of perspectives and to inspire the team and students to be curious about different voices.
Thank you, Andy. Kirsty, what's yours?
Okay, so mine is to inspire others to be resolute and to help them on that journey.
Thank you, Kirsty. Harriet, what's yours?
Mine is to listen to young people more about the issues that are important to me, and also to talk more about sustainable well-being.
Thank you, Harriet. Jordan, what's your pledge?
I would say to make learning about equality explicit, not just snuck in through the back door in the curriculum.
Thank you, Jordan. And Laura, what's your pledge?
My pledge is that I will take people as I come, and I will not impose a typical expectation on them, and everything that they have to contribute is valid.
Thank you. What a powerhouse panel. I really, really appreciate all your time and energy and commitment. Go and put the kettle on, have a cup of tea, enjoy the sunshine, and we'll be back at 11 o'clock for our third panel. Thank you so much to all of our speakers.